So welcome to Webinar 7 in the IMPACTUS Online Sales Academy for August 2025. Webinar 7 is effective negotiation and closing as we come towards the end of the sales cycle. And as ever, I want to start with a bit of context as to why we've chosen effective negotiation and closing as one of the 8 webinars that we've put together for those across the program. So the first thing is, as many of you probably know, negotiation and closing is something of an art form when it comes to sales. There's lots of people who I call kind of bridesmaids who can get customers to the altar. They can take them on a journey. They've got the personality and skills to build an opportunity. And they're very credible in terms of how they present in a customer environment. They've got the knowledge, they've got the experience, but do they always get the job done? Customers like them, customers warm to them, but they might still feel as though they're not quite at the top of their game when it comes to getting the deals over the line, closing the deal and getting the best value for that deal for the business as well as for the customer. I call people on this particular sort of cycle more bridesmaid than bride, looked apart, talked apart, fantastic in terms of what they do, except for the fact that they're not really exchanging rings as often as they'd like to. Can they handle the tough end of the negotiation and discussions at the tough end of the sales cycle? How do they handle the inevitable price conversation? And we'll touch on that quite a bit as we go through the webinar in terms of my approach to price and where it sits and how you should deal with it. Are they creative enough to get past blockages and objections and handling tough conversations, or do they choke too often and leave it with the person to think about, consider, etc.? Do they understand the rules of the game? And indeed, there are rules of the game, and it's all really about control, which we're going to go through throughout the webinar. Too many simply don't close enough or regularly enough, which is why we've chosen this as a webinar of interest, and the numbers suggest that lots of people are interested in even their experienced teams, tips, hints, practicalities, and maybe going back to basics in terms of how they've previously performed and some of the bad habits they might have slipped into to remind them of good practice. So that's kind of why Webinar 7 is negotiation and closing. I asked the audience to score themselves, first of all, for their level of negotiation experience, which has an impact on their skill and confidence in getting a deal done. And the end game of that is, obviously, the more experienced you are at negotiation, the likelihood is the higher the score is going to be for getting a deal over the line. But that's not necessarily always true. You often find people who've got lots of experience are still not that confident of getting the deal done that works for them and for the business as well as for the customer. So particularly based on if you work in a very competitive environment, you've got some tough customers and tough competitors, those numbers might be 6s and 7s out of 10. And my job today is to share with you little practical hints and tips that might make those 6s and 7s into 8s and 9s. And then let's see where we take that. Okay, so I often refer to the fact that business is like dating, particularly when it comes to business relationships. So whether you're buying or selling, it's about kind of building that relationship, building that trust, building that confidence to invest in something of a longer term opportunity for both parties. But it's all about understanding the dynamics of what you're trying to achieve on that kind of relationship journey. Now, when it comes to negotiation, there are 3 elements of negotiation that you need to aim for. And at the end of every negotiation, after every negotiation's been complete, you need to look at these 3 elements and see if they're all in place. If they're all in place, that's a good deal for everyone. If they're not all in place, there's a chance that it will either fall down later on or there'll be some regret on either your part, the customer's part, or in some element of how the deal is structured. And it comes down quite simply to an equilateral triangle, by the very nature which all sides are equal. So the first requirement of any negotiation is you've got to provide value for the customer. Or if you're buying from somebody, the supplier has to get value from that if you're the actual customer in that situation. But if you're a sales professional, as most people will be on these webinars, you have to provide a solution where the customer feels there's value in it for them. And we'll talk about it later on. It's not just the price point, but value represents a wider picture. If it doesn't provide value for the customer, they may reluctantly in some cases end up purchasing from you because they've got little choice if you've got stock and nobody else has. But that won't build a relationship, and very quickly that'll come off the books later on when the supply chains are sorted and the customer doesn't trust the fact that you've not looked after them particularly well at the time when you had the opportunity to do so. So taking value for the customer is number one priority. Second thing, quite obviously, there's got to be value for the business. If the business doesn't get value out of it, what's the point in doing the deal? What's the point in making the sale? What's the point in building that relationship? And the reality is, when you sell to win a deal at a price point that you're not particularly comfortable with, just to get it over the line, I invariably believe that those customers who get the best deal out of you in terms of price point through either bullying or just being intransigent or just being difficult to deal with and you want to win the business, they become the hardest to service, the highest expectations of you, and the least value for the business. So it's about finding a value point for the business that works for you whilst also working with the customer. But the last one upon which it's all built is your relationship with the price point or the negativity or emotional attachment to that price point. And I'll give you an example. If you are selling a product that you believe in, that you believe is a premium or a prime product, you would have no issue or no fear about positioning that product as a prime or premium product. However, if you're being asked to sell something that you don't believe is prime or premium at a prime or premium price point, you're probably going to have some emotional negativity towards that. And that will, in fact, transition into your conversation. It's very hard to sell something that you don't believe in. And I'm sure some of you on here have worked for organizations where you've had to do that, and you're never as successful as you are when you work in an organization selling a product or service that you do believe in, that does deliver value, delivers value for the customer, delivers value for you, but also the price point is the right price point for what you're wrapping around that particular opportunity. So the first three things you've got to think about is, we're negotiating, is this right for the customer? We're negotiating, is it right for the business? We're negotiating, do I believe that what I'm asking is reasonable and within the remit of the marketplace in which we operate? All three of those are right. The chance of success are increased significantly. Now, when it comes to sales, there's an initial conversation around negotiation, because negotiation isn't just about getting a deal over the line. Negotiation could be negotiating to be on a shortlist, negotiating to be considered as a potential preferred supplier. Negotiation could be asking someone to give you some of their time just to consider what your offer and your business might be about. So negotiation doesn't start at the end of the sales cycle. Sometimes you're negotiating with people who are looking at the potential of working with you at some point further down the line. And they fall into a variety of categories. And I've got 5 here that are pretty common. The first one is the information gatherer. Now, the problem with the information gatherer is they often have a fairly junior title, or shall we say a non-senior title. They might have a title that says manager, head of, or director in their title. So a lot of salespeople don't treat an inquiry or an opportunity from an information gatherer with the same respect as they would if it was from a sales manager or a head of procurement or a managing director or a finance director or whatever, because the job title doesn't suggest that it should do. The reality is an information gatherer might be on a mission from one of those aforementioned senior people to find out what's available in the marketplace. I've seen it so many times where somebody in a fairly junior role might be asked to go and assess the market. We're looking to change supplier for this particular product or service. I'm giving you a project to do. Find out what's out there. Find out who's doing what. Find out who is should be on our radar, and come back to me with some recommendations. The person they're going to recommend it to is probably the financier or the strategist and business driver, but the information gatherer is the person who says, I've found 6 companies who all provide the service that we want to within the remit of what you asked me to look for, within the quality, the service, the reputation, everything that you're looking for. And there's 6 on the list. And the financier and the strategist might say, which three should we be talking to? And if you've not treated that information gatherer with the respect that they deserve, even though you didn't know that they deserve that respect, everybody does, by the way, then you might not make that cut. So you've negotiated your way out of being a considered supplier to someone more senior because you've not treated that information gatherer with respect. Any inbound inquiry from whoever it might be is a chance to negotiate consideration. The next person in the business is your champions, the people who use your product. So if you're selling IT, it's the IT manager, it's the server room manager, it's the the security IT security manager, the people who are using your products, using your services, the people who are actually the end users. So we've got on the webinar program Michael from Play Scheme, and they design and install basically play areas for schools and open spaces and all that kind of thing. They're champions of the children. The champions of the children who just having a wow factor time with their product or service. So the more you've got children talking about your product and the enjoyment and the energy it brings them and all that kind of thing, you need to get those on side in that scenario because they're going to be selling your idea for you in a way that you couldn't possibly sell because they're the people using it on a day-to-day basis. The scrutineer is the person who's looking at the entire deal in terms of commercials, operation, everything that goes with it. Does this stack up to consideration? Where's the case studies, referenceability? The people who are procurement, for example, looking at the dotting the I's and crossing the T's, and they want to make sure that it does all those things for them. The financier, quite obviously, the person with the money, and the business strategist is the person who's going to sign off on purchasing. So whether it's head of procurement in a smaller business, the MD, department heads, or whatever it might be. So what we've got to think about, first of all, is who am I negotiating with first and what am I negotiating for? I'm negotiating for consideration. I'm negotiating for them to be champions on my behalf. I'm negotiating a way around the process if the process doesn't fit for us, but we are 90% there. But can they negotiate 10% of flexibility because everything else lines up? Financially, we'll come back to that shortly in a minute in terms of how we deal with finance. And ultimately, the strategist or business driver is probably taking a steer from some of the other people, but also using their own knowledge and their own decision making to decide whether they want to work with you or not. So being aware of who you're negotiating with in the first place and what you're negotiating for is vitally important. Okay. So the next thing is something we didn't put into the webinar on the live scenario is a bit about people really and understanding how you communicate and influence people and what that means and how to get the best out of those kind of scenarios really. So I've put this extra content in which has made the webinar a little bit longer than the live 1 hour webinar, but it's worthwhile when you look at understanding the dynamics of people. And essentially, we have a way of being communicated with and how we make decisions that suits us as individuals. So we start with you, and I'm going to ask you to think about the vertical axis of logic and instinct. When it comes to making a decision on a major purchase for you, a car, a piece of technology, a holiday, something for a hobby or an interest, something like a bike or a motorbike or fishing equipment or sports equipment or hiking boots or something where there's a lot of choice, a lot of different brands, a lot of different price points. I'd like you to break that line either halfway up or halfway down, not right near the middle, based on whether you're a logic or an instinct person. What I mean by that is logic is all about understanding information, analysis, detail, pros and cons, looking at kind of, information that'll help you to make an informed judgment. Logic says, I'm going to go with this particular choice of push bike. I've done the research, I've looked at the analysis, and this is the push bike for me. But you've done it through analysis and data information. You'd split the line halfway up towards logic, towards the arrow. If you're instinctive, that's because you trust the brand or you trust your gut or you like something on first viewing. And that's where you go and buy a car. You're looking to buy a car. You go out for the day, try to buy a car, looking at what's out there. Somebody in the logic box would be looking to create a shortlist. Somebody in the instinct box would buy a yellow soft top with silver alloy wheels because it looks fantastic. And they go, instinct tells me I want that car. So if you're a gut instinctive person, you like a brand and you'll always be loyal to that brand. Take the phones off the table for that equation, because once you've got an iPhone and once you've got an Android, you're pretty much stuck. But if you're, I like that, I want that, let's go for that person, you split the line halfway down. Left to right, validation and confidence is how you, once you've made your decision, how much you're going to stick with that decision in terms of being confident to move on. So splitting the line towards the right-hand side, towards the right-hand arrow with confidence is because you've made the decision, you've never given it a second thought, you're moving on, you've got somewhere else to be, something else to be doing, decision made, I've bought whatever it is I'm buying, rear view mirror, let's go. Not giving it a second thought. If you're a validation, and you split the line towards the arrow of the validation, essentially with a validator, you're just double checking. I'll just be sure. Hang on a second. Before I spend the money, I'll just have another think. I'll just have another read through. I'll just, hang on. I'll just check that reader's review or that owner's review once more, or I'll just have a little check on the internet and see what else people are saying about this particular product. And there's nothing wrong with that, by the way. But the reality is you can also be a validator after you've purchased something. And many people are. And I'll give you an example of being a post-purchase validator. Let's say you're chosen to go on holiday to Cyprus and you've never been to Cyprus before. The first time someone says to you, where you going on holiday, and you say Cyprus, and they say, well, I've been before. If your first question is, what was it like? Did you enjoy it? You're still a validator. In other words, I've made a decision, but I'm hoping someone tells me I've made the right decision. So you're going to split the line either halfway up or halfway down, halfway left or halfway right, and you're going to join up the box to see which box you're in. Now, this is under normal circumstances, normal decision-making circumstances, okay? It's really important to know yourself. It's also really important to understand how people that you're going to deal with also make decisions and communicate and prefer to be communicated with. So I'm going to whiz through this quite quickly. In the top right-hand box, you've got a driver. It's all about the headlines. It's all about learned behaviour. It's all about using their logic and knowledge and learned behaviours to make a decision, but make a decision they will. Drivers are always spinning plates, to-do lists, lots going on. They like to make decisions and like to get things done. They do use logic, but they don't use detailed logic. They use the fact that if they're going to buy a car, it'll be a German car because the three German cars are probably about right. It's okay, no problem. That's learnt behaviours. It's a bit of headline research and whatever, but it's all about the headlines, all about predisposed to make a decision. Drivers get things done. I'll come back to that in a bit more. Underneath the driver, you've got the expressive, the art of the possible. What's the worst that can happen? Let's give it a go. Instinct tells me it's okay. And once I've made a decision, I'm not even going to second guess myself. I'm just going to go for it. These are the people who are, why not? Let's go. Let's give it a try. And I'll come back to a bit more information about each of these characteristics shortly. Top left, you've got the analysts, the clues in the first four letters, very detail conscious, and analysts will always make the right decision, always. The reason they make the right decision is because they take away all of the risks by analysing, validating, checking, looking at the detail, pros and cons. And if they're not ready to make a decision, they're not ready to make a decision. And if they're not ready to make a decision, there's nothing you can do to force them to do that. Underneath the analyst, you've got the people person. What's the impact on people? The amiable person. So instinctively, they've got a good instinct. Validation just means to make sure that everyone's happy with decision-making, how it works. So I'm going to talk to you about these four characteristics in headline form. I'm going to talk to you about what that means when it comes to your customers and what it means if you're in a different box to them. Okay, so let's start with working patterns and how a driver works, for example. So a driver prefers headlines, not details. If you're looking at a driver and you want to sell something to them, give them the headlines with a few bullet points. They are skim reading based on logic. They like brands that they trust because it's easier and quicker. They won't necessarily buy something without previous knowledge, but they won't want detailed knowledge at the point of making a decision. Next thing is, time is their biggest challenge. These are the people who are always on the way somewhere else. They're always looking at the watch and going, I'll be with you in a second. Actually, how long do you need? I've only got a few minutes. When you say to a driver, how are you? And what you're asking about is in their health situation, how are you? They always reply with busy. Drivers always measure their day in busyness. So they're always under pressure, self-inflicted quite often because they're always taking things on and spinning plates, etc. But time is their biggest challenge. Plate spinners, as I call them, always on the go, but they will make a decision one way or the other because they don't want to put something else on their to-do list. They want to make a decision and move on. Now, if you've got a customer who's a driver, you want something doing, give it to a driver in terms of your team. But as a customer, if you get to the headlines of your customer very quickly, you can tell them about saving time and improving performance and making their job easier and taking one less thing off their to-do list. And they'll make a decision one way or the other. They're predisposed to say yes or no, but they are predisposed to make a decision. Drivers do not sit on fences. Give them the headlines, push them along in terms of efficiency, push them along in terms of making a decision to work with you that's going to reduce their workload. I'm currently working with an analyst at the moment, and they're overanalyzing everything. I want them to be more driver, so I can say to them, that's not as detailed as you need it to be. That's not a problem. I'm a driver by nature, and it's driving me insane because the detail that this analyst wants is beyond reasonable, in my view, because of the scale of decision they're making. The impact of them making a decision is not so significant that they're scared to do so. Drivers will make a decision one way or the other, and they will live with that decision. Okay. Headline working patterns for an analyst. Okay. An analyst is all about full picture. An analyst is all about the full detailed information. They are naturally risk averse. They don't want anything to come back and bite them. They don't want anything that they're not sure about. They don't want to know anything that might not be full picture, that if it comes back and they weren't aware of, it'll make them look at risk, as it were. So they like accuracy, they like quality, they like information in a lot of detail, but they can procrastinate and check forever. Now, you might say there's nothing wrong with that, and there isn't, because it's their choice. But the reality is they'll follow a process all day long, and they'll use process, and they'll use checking and double checking, and they can't be forced and they can't be pushed. You have to let an analyst make their decision. What you can only do with an analyst, if you're selling to an analyst, is give them as much information as possible with as much of a recommendation as possible and leave them to think it through. But if you want something doing accurately in work, give it to an analyst, but give them time to make the decision. So when you've got an analyst who's looking to buy from you, give them time to make the decision. Do not force them. They do not like to be forced, but give them as much information that favours your opportunity as possible on a technical, operational and commercial level. They want the detail. Expressives. Now, these are the people who work in sales themselves. Often they are ideas people. How can we solve this particular problem? Usually very positive. I've never met a salesperson yet when you say, how did your meeting go? And they actually say, well, actually, it was a bit crap, to be fair. Most salespeople come out of a meeting and go, yeah, it went really well. So salespeople are often expressive. They're certainly expressive on drivers in a lot of cases. They like to have ideas and then get them done. But a very positive person. What's the worst that can happen? They don't like routine or repetition, but they're not always a complete finisher, so they get bored quite easily. So as an expressive, you like to present ideas to a potential customer, get them as excited as you are about it, build relationships around that in terms of being positive and enthusiastic, and use the energy to convert people to your level of energy. Look, what's the worst that can happen? Take a risk, get on with it, buy it. It's going to be great. I'll look after you. You know, all that kind of language, which is fine. However, if you don't get a decision quite quickly, there's a distraction. Oh, something else over there's come up. Oh, something else. Oh, whatever. So you don't always go back 2, 3, 4, 5 times to the process of following things up. You might do a sales follow-up quote 2 or 3 times, but actually it might need 5 or 6 times. And by then you've lost interest because you've got something new and shiny to follow over here. If you want some ideas and creativity, talk to an expressive. But if you've got a customer who's an expressive, nail them down to a decision, because they're so easily distracted by this, by that, by the other. They're often predisposed not to make a decision, not because they're indecisive, but because they're distracted. So make sure you get them to complete and finish on your decision making. They're often very positive. Energize that positivity with an expressive person. And then you've got the friendly and the affable. You've got the people person, the amiable, naturally helpful. They are harmony and they don't like conflict. These are the people who are loyal and sometimes loyal beyond belief. These are the ones who frustrate you as a salesperson when they tell you all about the fact that their current supplier is just a bit shit. But actually, it's Trevor. He's been supplying us for years. Honestly, I know he's not very good. I know he could be better, but it's Trevor, isn't it? So I don't really want to upset Trevor by kicking him into touch or bringing another person in. So when they're like that, it's because they don't like the conflict that goes with it. So what you've got to do with somebody who's amiable is give them a chance as a get out clause to work alongside their existing supplier until you can prove and demonstrate to them that you are the right decision. They do not want to rock the boat with their existing supply chain because it's on a personal level quite rude in their world. They're good at building rapport and relationships with you, and once you're in there, they are loyal beyond belief, but it's that getting past the initial hurdle on that basis. But they can embed people in their other people's drama. When you ring an amiable and say, how was your weekend? They will tell you how their weekend's been. If you're a driver, you're looking at your watch thinking, I wish I hadn't asked. Reality is, an amiable wants to build relationships and wants relationships built with them. You cannot go gung-ho into a relationship with an amiable without spending the time developing that relationship, smoothing the waters over with regard to what might or might not happen by working with you. Amiable people are the glue that holds together a team when things are under pressure, but they're often quite difficult to deal with because they don't like conflict. And when they're buying, conflict might be there. Negotiation conflict with existing suppliers, conflict with you because they're not quite sure whether they should or they shouldn't buy from you, and that kind of thing. So understanding those four headline characteristics is really important. There's no right or wrong with it, to be fair. It's really about your self-awareness and the impact you have on other people. So, for example, drivers usually have got plates spinning, so they'll try and fit things in. They'll try and do things quickly, efficiently, get to a decision, yes or no, and move on. But an analyst doesn't want to get to a decision quickly. An analyst wants to get to a decision that's right. So you have to slow down with the analyst, give them more information than you probably would like to give them for them to make a decision and allow them to be in control of that decision making. The diagonal opposites are the ones that will kill you when it comes to that kind of potential of natural growth. Analysts and expressives. Expressives are what's the worst that can happen. It's brilliant, best thing since sliced bread. Analysts want evidence. Drivers want to crack on and get on with things, and the amiable's like, can we slow down and just, I want to get to understand a bit more about what's it going to do for me? Will my team be happy? How's it going to affect my supply chain? So the diagonals are the biggest challenge. Have a look in a bit more detail, these kind of psychological characteristic pieces, because they're really important to negotiation. And I'll give you an example. When I was meeting a client a while ago, I'm a driver. I've got definitely expressive tendencies, or I wouldn't do what I do for a living. But I'm a driver. I like to get things done. I've always got lots on the go, lots of different sort of priorities, which is fine. However, I was sat with a driver, and we were going to restructure their entire sales function over 3 divisions. It was quite a big piece of work. And over 20 minutes, him and me in the room on a whiteboard, scaled out what we were going to do. We're going to do this, and this. Brilliant, no problem. He said, right, let's do it. I worked out it was probably 10 or 12 days, and 10 or 12 days is okay to a driver. It'll be 10 or it'll be 12. I'll come to negotiation later on, but it was 10 or 12, and the driver said, that's okay. It's going to be in that ballpark. We're okay with that. But then just as we were about to leave, the finance director walked in. The finance director, naturally, is an analyst, looked at the whiteboard and said, what's that there? So that's how we're going to restructure the sales team and the sales function across the 3 divisions. Oh, okay. He said, have you got that on some kind of project plan with a Gantt chart and milestones and whatever? And I had to do a 22-page proposal document for the finance director to get signed off a job that I'd already had verbally signed off by the driver, who was the MD. 2 drivers changing the world in 20 minutes. Let's put some detail on it later, but let's get on with it. The finance director wanted the detail, and I had to give him the 22-page document. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got the gig signed off by him. He'd have always argued with the MD, saying we haven't got enough information upon which to communicate and commission Nick to do the work for us. give them what they need. If they need information, unfortunately, they need information. If they need headlines, give them the headlines. If you're an analyst, don't overdo the information you give to people who are not in the same box as you, because that's the reverse psychology where that doesn't work either. So that's just a bit about people. It's important to have that in your locker. It's important to know where you sit and where you stand when it comes to how you naturally work. And you might say, I can be in any one of those boxes at any one time, but you will have a natural instinct. It's either make a quick and important decision based on your experience, make a quick and important decision based on gut instinct, make the right decision but take your time over it, or make a decision that has the least negative impact on people. You will have a natural style. Whatever your natural style is, understand it, but understand the people you're negotiating with. Okay. All this kicks into bigger picture thinking, and sometimes you meet people and they just lack a bit of commercial awareness or commercial acumen. And it might be, and I say this with all due respect to people who work in procurement, sort of, procurement professionals are often asked to procure something that they don't know what they're procuring. So in other words, they've got all the skills of procurement using portals and spreadsheets and numbers and commercials and all the things that go with it, like a quantity surveyor in construction or a procurement professional in IT, but they don't know what they're procuring. And that lack of their commercial acumen might cost you if you don't take control of that. And I'll give you an example. And the example is KFC. KFC sell chicken, essentially Kentucky Fried Chicken. Everything that's in there is a derivative of chicken. So they've got 650 outlets across the UK. And a number of years ago, probably just before COVID, Kentucky Fried Chicken changed their supplier for refrigerated deliveries of chicken across their entire network of 650 plus outlets. And somebody in procurement sat there with a smug look on their face thinking, I've saved £250,000 of our procurement on refrigerated deliveries. Aren't I clever? However, they gave that contract to a company who didn't have enough vehicles to reach 650 outlets on a regular basis to give them the chicken that they needed to function as a restaurant or an outlet for KFC. So you probably remember very, very quickly, within days, KFC were running out of chicken. It was a national news story. It was a disgrace, apparently. There was a lady who was famously filmed coming through a drive-through somewhere in the northwest of Skelmersdale or Bolton or somewhere of that nature. And they thrust a camera and a microphone in her face and said to her, so what's the situation here? And she said, I've just been through the drive-through and they've got no chicken. It's an absolute disgrace. And then she said, I've had to go to Burger King, which made me think maybe cooking a meal wouldn't be an option for her. But yeah, Kentucky Fried Chicken ran out of chicken because the procurement professional saw one cell on a spreadsheet, which was refrigerated delivery costs, and said, I know we can save money on that refrigerated delivery cost, and went out to market and got someone to sell a delivery cost reduction of £250,000. The person who was incumbent should have spotted the fact that they were going to lose the contract to a smaller vehicle fleet and should have used their own knowledge and commercial acumen to question the judgment of the professional procurement person, not in a way that's confrontational, but just to say to them, have you absolutely categorically agreed that they have sufficient fleet availability to deliver the chicken? We've been doing this chicken delivery for 15 years, and on some days we are stretched, and we've got 40 more vehicles in our fleet than they've got. How are they going to deliver that? That commercial acumen that they didn't have at KFC, the person who was being kicked out as the incumbent did have, but possibly didn't raise. Now, KFC lost £4 million in less than 10 days. In that situation, they saved £250,000 and then they lost £4 million in less than 10 days. Where do you think KFC went back to when it came to getting the chicken delivers back to their 650 outlets? Of course, they went back to the previous incumbent. Who's in control of those discussions and negotiations now? Absolutely the previous incumbent. So just because someone wants to move or shift or buy something cheaper, if you don't think it's the right decision for them, you have an absolute requirement to raise that. Not to question their commercial acumen in so many words, but to get them thinking about, have they seen the bigger picture? It's really, really important as part of negotiation to do that. Use your knowledge and experience to say, I can see why you've done that. I understand why you've done that. But in reality, I'm not sure that in 6 months' time that will give you what you think it's going to give you. Have you at least looked at that? Have you at least considered it beyond a cell on a spreadsheet with a number in it? Okay. Next thing's important when it comes to potentially giving you an edge is if you're selling to an existing customer, what's the current value of that business to them? So in other words, what's your supplier status? Are you a key supplier? Are you a main supplier? Or are you one of 10 and you're getting the scraps from the table? If you're not a key supplier, then the chances are you haven't got anybody fighting your corner for you because it's a small element of something which is a much bigger picture. But you need to be aware of your supplier status in your customer environment so that you can leverage that if that supplier status is either, you're one of their two or three key suppliers, you're their top performing supplier, you've got some KPIs that say about delivery and never letting them down. You need to understand what your supplier status is. If it's a new customer that you've not supplied before, you can still leverage your supplier status with your existing suppliers and tell them the impact of why people buy from you. And why people buy from you and the impact it provides to them is comfort to a potential customer. Because a lot of customers, particularly analysts, don't want to have the risk of taking on somebody who hasn't got a proven track record. So your supplier status is really important as a cornerstone of potential future negotiations, whether it's for the first time with a new customer or going back to an existing customer and referencing what you've already done for them that they can recognize. But you should never assume what that supplier status is. You should never assume the impact that you have with people. And we'll come back to it shortly when it comes to reasons people buy from you and then leveraging that as part of your negotiation. What are you good at? What's your current situation? What's the strength and weaknesses of your supply of your customer environment? So, for example, if your customer has got a 3 month stock of the product you're trying to sell to them, that's a strength in their negotiation and a weakness in yours because there's no urgency to move. But what are their strengths and weaknesses? What's their decision-making processes? What mistakes have they made before? What has happened in the industry that might be a risk to them? What are they trying to overcome by talking to you as an existing supplier for something else or a new supplier for the first time? What is it they're trying to address as a strength or a weakness in their business? If anything, what will change by working with you, by undertaking a transaction with you, you have to paint that picture for them and tell them what it's like to work with you, what it's like to be a customer of yours, what it's like to be looked after and managed and supported by you. If you don't tell them, they won't look to work it out themselves. So it's really important that leveraging that knowledge, that impact, the years of experience and expertise you've already got, case studies, testimonials, evidence that proves that you are at the top of your game and it's going to solve a problem, reduce a weakness, and make a big difference to them is part of that negotiation. You're building a platform upon which to negotiate from a position of strength. It's so important. You might get a hurdle thrown at you early on, what I call the early objection. And the early objection could be anything. It could be anything from, well, we've not used you before, or if you're looking to get some time in their diary, I'm really busy, or whatever it might be. We mentioned it on a previous webinar about the cluster. Is that the only reason stopping us moving forward today? The one thing you shouldn't do with an objection is get involved in objection handling all the way through a negotiation. And you shouldn't get involved in objection handling at the very outset. But if someone throws a curveball at you early on, just say to them, is that the only reason stopping us moving forward? Yes, it is. Leave it with me. We'll cover it later. I want to come back to why we're here, why we're talking. Don't get involved in discussions that you can't win too early. It's a bit like presenting a proposal to somebody. If you just send a proposal to somebody and they read it, you've lost all control. If you say to them, I want to present that proposal to you, and they say, can you not send it to me? And you say, well, actually, no, I'm going to present it to you because I want to make sure I'm here to handle any of your questions. The reality of that is you're controlling the release of the information. So don't get involved in things too early that don't have a positive effect on your how you present and how you handle the process and the control of leading up to negotiation and leading up to closing. If somebody gives you an objection early, say, I've noted that, I'll come back to it, I promise I'll cover it later. Anyway, moving on, as it were, because otherwise you get involved in a game of tennis. So, on the webinar, I asked people to write down 5 or 6 reasons that people buy from them. And I thought it's really important to understand why your existing current customers buy from you. Not what they'd like to say, what they would actually say, the reasons they'll buy from you. And I mentioned this on an earlier webinar where I went to work with a company in Hull who were the aluminium manufacturing company. And I said to their sales team, what do you need to be more successful? And they said, we need better pricing. And I said, I don't think you do. I think there's other reasons why your customers buy from you. And what we did was we got the evidence and proof of why customers buy from them. And it's really important to get that feedback so you've got some leverage. And what I mean by that is once you know what your customers are buying, why they buy from you, you can leverage it as part of your negotiation platform, if that makes sense. So what we did with Elthringtons, and I'll share this with you because it's a really simple way of doing it. I rang 50 customers at random off their list. They gave me 150 customers. I didn't ring the ones that told me to ring. I didn't ring their favourites. I just rang 50. And I rang more than 50. It was the first 50 we got to answer. I opened up, not MailChimp, the other one, SurveyMonkey. And I had a SurveyMonkey set up on the phone. And I said, I'm going to give you 7 words and phrases. I just want you to rank in order of 3, 2, 1 or 1, 2, 3, the reasons you buy from Elthrington. And I read them in alphabetical order. So I said, availability, customer service. I used experience or expertise. I used one or the other, experience or expertise. Price, quality, reputation, technical support. And I read them out in that order. And I said, I'll give you a minute. Can you tell me the 3 reasons you buy from Elthringtons? And they came back and we crunched the numbers into SurveyMonkey, ran the report, and I mentioned it on a previous one. Number 1 reason that they bought from Elthringtons, availability. They always had the stock. Number 2, technical support and backup and knowledge of the team. Number 3, price. Now, when you know that and you've got an independent voice who's asking those questions of your customers, you can then, in a very confident manner, deal with everything around why your customers buy from you, other than just talking about the one thing that a lot of salespeople focus on, which is financials. I never, and I mean never, discuss price or financials until I'm ready to discuss price or financials, irrespective of whether I get pressured to do so. I get questioned by someone, how much do you charge for training? My answer is always, I don't know. And they look at me like I'm an idiot. What do you mean you don't know? Of course you must know, you're a training company. Yeah, but I don't know what your problems are. I don't know what you're trying to solve. I don't know what I'm going to create in terms of a solution. And I don't know if what that solution looks like is exactly what you're looking for. So let's address that first. You tell me what your challenges are, what your problems are, what you're trying to resolve. You tell me what great looks like. You tell me what your end game in an ideal world looks like, and then I'll work out whether or not I can create something that takes you on that journey towards that great end game, what it looks like, and delivers a solution that you're looking for. At that point, if you're happy with that, then we can get into the commercials of the discussion. But there's no point talking commercials if I don't get the opportunity right to solve your problem for you. So I always divert or deflect or swerve a price conversation very early on. And I never use the word price. I never use the word cost. I always say to them, we will talk shortly about the investment you're going to make in your team. You should also use the word investment on proposals, pitches, language, conversations, because if you say price or cost, you have to justify that price or cost. Someone will say, well, I can get it cheaper, or that price is a bit expensive. If you say investment, you will have a conversation about return on investment. What will that give me as a return on investment? So when I talk about training, I talk about the investment in your team. We know it's cost, we know it's money, we know it's financials, we're not stupid. But the actual dynamics of changing the word to investment means I'm then talking about what that gives them as an output. I'm not talking about the input, which is how much it's going to cost them. They can get cheaper trading than mine. Okay, big deal. I'm not talking about cheap trading. I'm talking about solving a problem with a managed solution that's going to create the end game that you're looking for. And the investment in doing so is this. And that's when you get to the price conversation, because at some point, of course, you will have to discuss price. And at some point, you have to take ownership of that, because it's the elephant in the room until you do, but not until you're ready. Not until you've decided that they've got a problem, you've got a potential solution. That solution looks like this, and are they happy? How does that look? Are we on the right track? What do you think so far? Does that look like we're in the right place in terms of getting that problem off your desk and resolved for you? How does it look so far? All of which is positive to get energy into the conversation, and they're going, yeah, it looks great. That's exactly what we're looking for. I get lots of my clients saying to me, your proposals are really spot on. They're exactly what we're looking for. Funnily enough, they are, because I'm listening to what you're saying, I'm reflecting it back. And I sometimes don't even put a price in a proposal. I want the proposal to do the selling for me. And then when they'll say to me, you haven't put a price in here, I say, no, I want to talk about investing in your team. Let's have a phone call, a conversation, a Teams or a Zoom about that. Now, some of you might say we can't do that in the world that we operate in. I totally understand that. I totally get that. But the reality is, it's not about the price. It's about the solution first and foremost. So if you're a solution provider, work the solution out first. If you then have to put the price in, put it as an investment, but also don't just send a proposal to a customer. Represent it to them. Share screens on Teams and Zoom. I'm setting up a call to present our proposal to you. Could you not just send it through? No, it's not how we operate. I'm going to send it through to you. If I send it through to you, I'm not there to answer any questions. I'm not there to make sure that it meets your requirements. I need 15 minutes on a Teams call, the same 15 minutes it would take you to read it. I'll present it to you, and I'll be ready for any questions and answers. And what you do when you present a proposal, you're presenting the technical solution that you're creating. And before you get to the page that they would normally turn to first, if you just sent a PDF and they've gone straight to price, at which time you might have lost it already, you say to them, right, how's that looking? So when you do reveal the investment or the price or the cost, however you want to use it, but I'd definitely use investment. When you reveal that, you've already got them on the hook to say, this is exactly what we're looking for. It makes the negotiation so much stronger. Because price is just one element of your negotiation. How many do you want? How often do you want them? If you're selling volume, if you're selling IT equipment, somebody would naturally expect a different price point for 20 laptops if they're buying 20 as one, or 3 servers out over one, or whatever it might be. So how many do you want? How often do you want them? Availability is a strange one, but if you've got it in and nobody else has, it gives you a strong bargaining point. And that worked a lot during COVID, for example, but it also works a lot now, where you might have an investment in stock so you can respond quickly. If yours is a little bit more expensive, but I can have it tomorrow, versus someone who hasn't got it, but it's cheaper, well, what's the point in waiting for something that you can't get? So availability is a negotiable item. Delivery, who's paying for it? How much is it? When do you want it? Can we get it to you quickly? Can we get it to you in a way that's cost effective? Are you paying a hell of a lot more for your delivery than you are for the actual goods themselves? How do we manage that? How do we get around that? Payment terms are a negotiable item, and I mentioned on the webinar, and it might be worth mentioning here because it seemed to get a smile. I was once working with a new customer, a big piece of work, significant for me in terms of my business, and when the sales director had already said, I want to work with you, and he said, we negotiated on what the investment was going to be. And then he said to me, so just to let you know, our payment terms are 60 days. And I just said, well, they're not. And he went, what do you mean? I said, well, I'm a small business. You're a multi-million-pound business, and I'm not a bank. I said, I'm not in a position where I can bankroll 60 days of payment terms for you. I said, so you must be, as a UK sales director, in a position to improve that 60 days, even if I am a new supplier. And he said, well, I could do 30. I said, that's fine. Let's do 30. I said, but actually, we're in September now, and I'm starting the training with you in October. I said, so if we do 30 days, I'll invoice you today on 30 days terms, and we'll start the work in October as scheduled. So we went from being 60 days payment terms to me actually being paid in advance because I negotiated that blocking point. Sometimes payment terms just need a bit of creativity in terms of how you get round them. Warranties and after sales, whether you've got a gold, silver, or bronze, we'll talk about that being a bad example shortly. But again, negotiable. What kind of after sales, what kind of warranties are you putting on there? 30 days, 90 days, 20 days, 100 days, whatever it might be. Consignment stock, if you are a supplier of materials and products and you might put product into a customer, they're not paying for that up front, they're paying for it as they draw it down. That's a really good negotiable item in the right circumstances, particularly if you're working with dealers, for example. Quality is negotiable, which sounds a bit weird, but it isn't. Quality is a negotiable item. Do you want a Audi? Do you want a VW? Do you want a Skoda? They're all vehicles, they're all from the same family, but what's important to you? Do you want the day-to-day workhorse, the Skoda? Do you want the slightly better than the herd, the slightly premium build quality of a VW? Or do you want engineering excellence? And it all depends on what you can afford. So if you can only afford the day-to-day workhorse, which is going to do you a great job, we'll call it the Skoda, we'll sell you a Skoda. What we won't do is sell you an Audi for a Skoda price, so quality is still a negotiable item. As indeed is price, which we're going to come on to now in terms of how to deal with the sort of controlling the element of price conversations. So the first couple of things is start high if you're starting in terms of what your price might be, because early on in the conversation, you might not know. So if you say, it's going to be between £8,000 and £10,000. I've heard £8,000, and I can't unhear that £8,000. 8 to 10,000 doesn't work, which is why when I was talking about a price band earlier, number of days earlier, I was doing it in the right environment with a guy who didn't care. I would never use a price band with an analyst because he'll have said I heard 8. But with the MD who was a driver, he said, yeah, 10 to 12 days is fine. We'll work the detail out later. However, if you talk about price band, £8,000 to £10,000, I hear 8,000. If you don't know and you're not quite sure, just say to them, it's probably going to be about 11, maybe 11 and a half, but I'm sure I can get it to be really compelling. But don't start at the 8 because you can't go up. And don't start at 10 if that's the way you want to get them to, because you'll never get them to 10 if you start at 10. Don't self-inflict your position. Don't say we're really quiet or we could really do with this order or it's month end, it will really help me, because it suggests that you're desperate for their business. When someone says to you, how's business? The answer is always great, actually really busy. We've had a lady on some of the calls, Al Mills. She's got a new consultancy in the medtech sector and she's really good at what she does. It's a relatively new business. The thing is, when you say to Al, how's business? She's saying to people, I'm really busy. And she is, to be fair. But if she said, actually, it's quiet, I've just started off, people will give her, the scraps from the table, or they'll give her charity. They'll say, you can come and work with us, but, we can't afford your full day rate. And she might feel obliged to look for that because she's got nothing else in. In reality, you're eroding your position by saying that I'm available, I've got not much on, I'll take anything you've got for me. The answer is, when you say, how busy are you? I'm always busy. So we're busy, we're growing, and be reluctant to be giving discounts away. Why should you give a discount away just because they've asked for it? Just because they've asked for it doesn't mean you should. Would you ask for a discount in Tesco's? You wouldn't. Some people want a discount because they want to feel like they can get something for nothing. Well, you know what? Go back to what's on the list of payment terms, volume, quality, whatever. You can build a deal and still be negotiating effectively. You're reluctant to give them the best possible deal at the lowest possible price. Of course you are. But also ignore the 5s and 0s. And I mentioned this on the call, on the live webinar, and people didn't know what I meant by the 5s and 0s. And 5s and 0s are just your natural next dropping point when it comes to numbers. So I'll give you an example. Let's say something is 20,500. That's a 5. When you drop on your next, so we say, what's the best you can do? Oh, 20,000, that's your 0. You don't think of going 20,486. we naturally drop down to fives and zeros, whether it's fives and tens, 50s and hundreds, 500s and thousands, God forbid 5,000s and zeros, but we naturally drop down to fives and zeros. Don't drop down to fives and zeros. You'd be amazed how much you're giving away just because you were too lazy to work a different number out in the on the opportunity. And I mentioned earlier about gold, silver, and bronze. Do not use gold, silver, and bronze packages. Why? What I mean by that is, when you see gold, silver, and bronze presented, you usually see bronze package, 6 dots. You get these 6 things. Then you see the silver package, you see the same 6 things and 3 more. Then you see the gold package, which has got the same 9 things and 3 more. So what people see is they say they want the 12 facilities and functions of the gold package, but they've already seen the bronze price. Mercedes used to call their cars different derivatives of something, and you couldn't cross-match one with the other. So what they said was, we've got sport, which gives you a sports kit, body kit, alloys, a wing on the back, a spoiler. It's looking how the car looks to sports pack. It's called the Mercedes Sport. The Avant-Garde was, that's more comfortable. It's got heated seats and leather and all the things that go with that. And then there's another one, I can't remember what the other one was. But if you went into Mercedes, they would say to you, what's important to you as a car buyer? And you'd say, I want it to look the business. They'd say, you want a Mercedes Sport, sir. Then they'd say to you, is there anything else that you'd like that Sport to have? They'd say, well, I'd like you to have the heated seats from the Avant-Garde. Of course, you can have that. They're not standard on the Sport. However, we can add them in as an optional extra for you. What you wouldn't buy is the Avant-Garde because it doesn't give you what you wanted, which is the sports look of the car. So when you name your packages, if you've got 3 different levels of service package, just call them 3 things that can't be immediately undervalued by the next one up being better, but at a more expensive price. That's the example of that. Okay. So in headline form for negotiation, you're looking at one of 3 things, and you concentrate on one of 3 things in every negotiation, every discussion. Are we making an operational difference? Are we saving time? Are we more efficient? Are we reducing risk? Whatever it might be. Commercial value. So whether that's long-term ownership costs, financial feeding into the commercial value. Are you going to help them to generate more as a result of buying from you? Are the commercials working on both sides, you and them? And then the financial investment that they're going to make. So talk about operational, talk about commercial, talk about financial in every negotiation. However, you've still got to get it across the line. So you've still got to get across the line. However, when you do that, sometimes you're giving it your best shot. And on the call, I asked somebody to say, have you walked away from a negotiation? And they said yes. And what I liked about that on the call was they were very professional. What they did was they tried their best to get everything lined up. They tried their best to go back with the best offer. They tried to negotiate and navigate the way around. Is it less of this and more of that? And what's the price point for this and that? And what's the quality? And they worked really hard and tirelessly to get a deal on the table. And yet that potential customer still said no. That's all well and good because you don't win them all. What you mustn't do is flounce out that conversation in a way that, well, you're just being unreasonable. I can't believe it. What the hell are you playing at? I've done my best and you're still saying no. You'll never get them back at the table. If you're professional and just say to them, look, I've tried everything. I'd love to work with you. I think you can see by what I've been, back to the well, back to the table, come back again. I think you can see my commitment and ambition to work with you. However, that is the best I can possibly do across the entire piece to potentially work with you. I'd love that to happen. If that can't happen at this stage, I'm going to have to leave that with you. If they've overstepped the mark, they'll call you back. If they haven't, then you've still got a chance to go back to them next time they're in requirements of your services. But you mustn't undermine that by being an annoyed sales professional who's put loads of hours and time into it and hasn't won the deal. That's just the life, unfortunately, of a sales professional. Maintaining professionalism is really important. I mentioned a dating reference earlier. I mentioned eHarmony. A few quick tips when it comes to thinking about the close. You mustn't close by asking for the deal without going through what I call the pre-close summary, the reminder of the process. So One of the things I talk about very early in the closing process is a reminder of why we're here. So you called us in because you've got this particular problem or challenge, okay? The high points of working with us would be that challenge will go away. That opportunity that you've got that's blocking your whatever it might be will be removed. Remind them of that. Sure, you understand what their requirements are, what their needs are, and remind them how you've overcome those concerns. So those concerns could be, and we mentioned it on an earlier webinar about, the fact that I'm based in York and you're based in Cardiff, and you mentioned that a couple of times. I believe I've overcome that. I just want to check that that's no longer an issue for you or an issue or a concern for you. And then you paint this picture of working together. Let them know what it looks like to be a customer. Let them know what it's looked like for you to fulfill that requirement, that order. Because a lot of people haven't got that creativity, particularly if they work in procurement and they are analysts. They're just functional. They're just operational. They just don't get this stuff around the edges of how easy it's going to be to work with you, the impact you're going to make, the simplicity you're going to bring to the table, the pleasure it's going to be being a supplier to them and them being a customer of yours, etc. What will it mean to you and what will it mean to them? Tell them they're important. Tell them you want the business. Tell them you feel valued if you were part of their supply chain, but also remind them if you were part of the supply chain, you would treat them with the respect they're maybe not getting already from someone who is supplying them at the moment, and read the reaction. Are you likely to get a second date or is there still work to do? You've got to remind them of the high points before you ask for the opportunity to close the deal. But there might also still be some weaknesses on the table, and you can't leave them on the table if they're going to undermine your overall ability to close the deal. And what I mean by that is if you don't address a weakness and you know it's still there, when you've left the conversation, they might be talking about your weakness, not about your strength. The example being me being based in York and my potential customer being based in Cardiff. If I hadn't have addressed that, I wouldn't have got the deal that I got to work with a customer in Cardiff because he couldn't have got past the fact that I was 4.5 hours away. It meant a lot to him. I overcame that and took it off the table. You have to do that at the point before you ask for the business. Okay. Now, the weaknesses that you might have could be any one of these, or more. You might be the wrong size. You might be too big, too small. You might not have been going that long. So when we talked about Al earlier, Al is new as a consultant at Sequel Consultants, but Al isn't new to MedTech, and Al isn't new to what she does at Sequel Consultants. Sequel Consultants is just the vehicle for her to deliver her capability. Al has got 25 years of experience in MedTech, 25 years of experience delivering the solutions that Sequel Consultants deliver. That's how long she's been established, 25 years, not the 9 months she's been established actually as a vehicle to deliver this particular scenario now. Don't let that be a problem. Capacity to deliver, if you're a small business, can you grow? Have you got any strength in depth? Is it just you? Location or geography could be a problem or an issue. Reputation, hopefully it's not. Hopefully it's a really positive thing, but if it's a weakness, you need to address it. If you've had a bit of a battering on social media recently, you need to address that. I'm sure none of you have had that, but your reputation can kill you in an instant. Or if you've got stiff competition, understand what makes your competition strong. Where do you stand against them? What are you good at that they're not good at? What's their weakness that you're going to push against? Never slag your competition off, but be aware of what they are, what they do better than you, but what you do better than them. And that's what you're going to be talking about when it comes to delivering a solution to get across the line. Okay. So the close is just the final act. You've got a pre-close summary, the bit we talked about, painting pictures, working together. We sat down originally, you talk about this particular problem. This is the solution we're going to provide. This is how it's going to look, working together. How does that look? Does that look like it's going to take away the problems and the challenges and the heartache that you've got? How does it feel against what you're looking for? Are we in the right ballpark in terms of the whole process, etc., etc.? Summarize before you ask for the close. That's the way to handle any outstanding objections and take any barriers off the table. If you don't know what they are and they still exist, you might have shot yourself in the foot. Get an agreement in principle. So, subject to whatever, it might be subject to me getting that price point right, suited to me getting that investment right, suited to me going away and working out the logistics of availability in September. Are you happy that we are the right choice? Yes. Okay. The actual clause is very different. Okay. The actual clause is, I use what I call the best clause ever. Now, not surprisingly, you'll all think, not surprisingly, I'm quite direct. Okay. I'm quite happy to look somebody in the eye, summarize the process, own and control the negotiation to get there, summarize where we are, and then look them in the eye, put my hand out and say, are we going ahead? That's a direct ask. But not everyone's brave enough to do that. Also, you might have misread the situation, or they might be a little bit reticent about giving too much away. So the best ever clause is quite simply with a good summary, with a good negotiation that leads to the good summary. Look them in the eye and say, so what happens next? What do you want to do now? The beauty of doing that is 60% of people say, yeah, let's go ahead. The other 40 will tell you why they're not ready to go ahead right now, but it also gives you a second bite of the cherry. Yeah, leave it with me. Okay, leave it with you. Can I ask you why? What do you need leaving with you, and why would you not be in a position to say yes or no today? I need to think it over with my colleague. Okay, that's absolutely fine. When will you do that? And what can I do to help you with that in terms of additional information? You're getting a second bite of the cherry when they tell you where they are in their thinking. I call it an iron fist with a silk glove. It's really powerful, but it feels like it's just been delivered in a positive, communicative, consultative way. What happens now? What do you want to do next? Don't get too distracted too early. Don't get too greedy too early. Win what's in front of you. If you've got £1,000 order that might lead to a £50,000 order, you'll only get the £1,000 order now. You won't get the 50. So don't try and get the £50,000 order. You might get none of them if you get too greedy too early. And don't upsell or cross sell until you've secured the thing that's in front of you, the current sales opportunity. So that's negotiation and closing. That's getting it over the line. That's some tips and hints on how to control the narrative with the people involved, the style of people that you're talking to, what they need from you, what they want from you, how they want it from you. A customer that you win today would be a customer for life if you manage it properly. If you don't do it right, if you don't negotiate that triangle, that's value for the customer, value for you, and value in terms of understanding the price point. If you don't create value for that customer, you won't be a customer. They won't be a customer for life. They'll buy from you reluctantly and already be looking for their next supplier. It's about a win, win, win for everybody. Okay. Any questions, as usual, please send them through. Please think about taking at least one action to do something different, stop doing something, do something better, try something new, try something fresh. That was negotiation and closing on webinar 7. Webinar 8, the final one in the original program, is protect and grow your existing customer spend. And that's really about how do you manage the hard-won work that's brought a customer to your table, because it takes a lot less effort to keep them than it does to win them. But the amount of people who constantly chase new business and take their eye off their existing customers is astonishing. We'll teach you how that not to be. However, I've got a special offer for you. It's a special offer because it's free. I put together a free additional bonus webinar for people who've been on any part of this webinar program, whether you've done all 8, whether you've done 1 or 2, you've done 3 or 4. And it's a special bonus webinar. It's on sales discipline and marginal gains for sales success. So for those who are doing this as a live program, that's on Monday, the 1st of September, same time, 12 till 1 UK time. If you're not doing the webinar program as a live event, then it's available. I'll put that in the promotional material, and you can choose that as a freebie to add into the webinars that you already are securing and purchasing and using. So without further ado, the webinar program is nearly over, but you can request a recording of any of them that you may have missed or you may require. And that's my contact details for LinkedIn. If you want to QR me and connect with me if you're not connected on LinkedIn, although I am connected to most of you on the live program, but not necessarily those who are watching this after the event. So that's been negotiation and closing. That's been webinar 7. Webinar 8 will follow shortly. And thank you for your time as ever.